Hey everybody, I am your host, Brendan. Welcome to another episode of Campus to Contracts. I'm joined by Mason as we go through the walk of his life, his story. Mason, welcome to the show. Excited to have you. We are about to drop into your junior season, but before we get into the junior season, your sophomore year of football just ended. You were crushing it, doing great things, and you decided to make some big decisions for your life, as most college kids do nowadays.
Yes, Brendan, I'm glad to be back, and nowadays it is a lot more popular. I did transfer, so at the end of my sophomore year, I made a decision to move to another university. I went from the University of Pennsylvania to Duke University.
So when did you decide you wanted to transfer? Was that after the football season? Was it during the spring semester? What was this decision like for you?
The decision had a lot of layers. It was very complicated. There were both on-field and off-field reasons for transferring, but all in all, it was after my spring semester. So I did go through spring ball with the University of Pennsylvania my last year there. I didn't make a decision to transfer until right before the beginning of my junior year of school and my junior season. So it was a very late transfer.
Was there something that happened that made you want to transfer? Because obviously, 2 years into an Ivy League system, you knew the system pretty well. You had a great sophomore season. So it certainly wasn't performance-based. It wasn't because of, schooling was difficult. What was the big driver for you?
I would say it was a couple things. So the financial situation at the University of Pennsylvania, because Ivy League schools don't give scholarships, it started getting extremely hard. And also being the type of player that I was, I'm not a super big guy, only 5'10", 175 at the time, maybe 78. I wasn't a huge player, and being that kind of, maybe some people considered undersized type of player at a smaller school, the advantages of how well I was playing weren't highlighted as well as they would be at a bigger university, at a bigger college football program. So that's kind of the reason for some on-field situations, whereas off-field were more due to some financial situations as well as some abilities I had to help my own ability when it came to getting better and what I was allowed to do, what I wasn't allowed to do when it came to the athletic department.
This is clearly before the NILs. This is clearly before any of these deals. So just so everybody has a frame of reference, is transferring a big thing at this time?
Not entirely, and especially leaving the Ivy League, pretty much almost unheard of. So this was in 2017. So there's no transfer portal. Transfer portal didn't exist. And so when you transfer, you have to get a physical paper release from your coach. And there's no NILs, so players aren't getting paid. So this is just your old-fashioned college football. Most of the kids that are playing college football are on scholarship. We played our non-conference games against scholarship schools like Fordham, like Lehigh. So everyone in the Ivy League, there are no scholarships. To this day, Ivy League schools don't give scholarships for athletics. They are subject to the transfer portal, though.
But if we back up for a second and you look at the stress of the situation, people today may be like, what are we talking about? He got NIL deals he could have gotten. There's all these different opportunities. Ivy League is a different experience. A lot has changed in that short amount of time. A lot's changed since my time, but a lot has changed in a very short amount of time. You're talking about the transfer portal, which is now probably one of the biggest covered things that's out there with college athletes, especially college football, college basketball. Kids are transferring left and right in every single sport. NIL deals are fantastic because you can transfer and up your NIL deal. You can get more money. You can get a better opportunity. So there's, to your point, every single kid who goes through these situations, if you will, they're all layered. There's always more to the story. And this is another reason why we, Campus to Contracts, don't like to just peel back one layer. When you look at a kid who's transferring, people like to talk about it's this reason, it's that reason. It's the same reason when you look at professional athletes. who changed teams. Writers like to indicate that this is just a one thing that made it happen or a decision based on one item. It's very small-minded of the writers. It's easy to sell papers that way. But to your point, this had multiple layers.
Yes.
Financial for your family, your education, your opportunity. There's so many layers here. So someone could look at it from one angle and say that doesn't make any sense. But when you add all these up, it made a lot of sense to you.
Yes. And like you said, it was extremely layered. And there were no NIL deals at this time. So, college football players weren't getting paid at all. And on top of that, the rules that I had to play by in the Ivy League, and I'm talking about more like administrative type rules, like 10 games only, no red shirts, and a lot of these type of rules that we will cover in a later segment of our show. I had to live by some very strict rules that kind of, in my opinion, inhibited my ability to perform, inhibited my ability to showcase my skills to NFL scouts, because that ultimately was my goal, and that ultimately was always the reason that I made my on-field decisions.
So you're getting ready to transfer, you're late to the game. That obviously impacts the opportunities that are there. You're coming from an Ivy League, so if I'm a coach, I'm not necessarily worried about you keeping your grades up and being able to perform on the field with grades. So from your vantage point, when you were looking at this opportunity, what was available at that time? How many colleges are we talking about?
So there weren't many schools that I was actually considering. My first thing was that I was not going to leave UPenn for a school that I considered academically inferior. So
Tough.
So I didn't have many options. Then the next thing that I considered was, what school do I feel like I could play at? And what school do I feel like would want my talent and my ability? I ended up finding that Duke, out of a few handful of schools, were one of the schools that I could possibly go to and go play at. So I reached out to a couple of coaches, and I was able to establish some communication lines after I got my release. Now, for everyone watching, it's different now. The transfer portal, I could put my name in, and then coaches around the country would be able to see that, and they could contact me via email or cell phone number. No, this is completely different. I had to get this physical release, this paperwork, my permission from my head coach at the University of Pennsylvania, the compliance permission at the University of Pennsylvania, and then I had to relay this information to these coaches so that they were allowed to communicate with me, because it was illegal for these coaches to communicate with players who had not been able to get this communication release from their prior university. So it's very old school communication. So schools weren't necessarily like aware that I was transferring. It wasn't like public knowledge, so to speak.
So you literally had to select the schools that you wanted to contact you, because you had to show them the right paperwork for them to even contact you.
Correct, for them to respond to me. Now, I was told by my coaches at Penn that Stanford heard about my release, Northwestern heard about my release, and a couple other schools. But after doing my own research and seeing where I felt like I could fit in based on all of the parameters that we have covered in our previous episodes, the roster, the coach, the defensive coordinator, all of those things, I chose Duke and then was able to transfer there because the team felt the same way about me that I felt about them at the time.
So as you're approaching this from an agent's perspective, you having this experience, there's nothing in your mind that would indicate that you think going back to the system that you were in was worthwhile or beneficial, if you will. The transfer portal that we have, a lot of folks complain about it, the timeline, the way it's done. But the way it was done previously was really very difficult for a college player to move at all.
Yes. And I would like to add this. Back then, when you got that release, you pretty much kind of were cutting your left foot off. You couldn't really go back to your university. Whereas now, there are players that are putting their names in the portal all the time, and then their university that they otherwise would be leaving convinces them to stay, convinces them to pull their name back out of the portal, and they end up playing at that same university. Now, I don't know how much bad blood there is in those particular situations, but when I was transferring, you weren't going to ask for that paper and not leave.
This is, again, I really struggle with people who complain about the way it's done today because they don't see it from the eyes of the athletes. Not many athletes become writers. We all know that. Athletes don't typically like writers, nor do they want to become a writer. So when writers cover this and how terrible it is for the university or how terrible it is for these poor coaches, I always think back to these times that these players, once they committed at 17, 18 years old, they really didn't have another option. So they didn't get along with that coach. They had to figure it out. They couldn't go anywhere else. Even if they weren't making the grades or got benched, it's not like they could leave and find another place to play because they still had to get the head coach to agree to it. They had to get the head coach,
the compliance,
the head of the university.
Yeah.
I mean, so you have to get several signatures. And going back to our earlier stages of get to know everybody, if you're not playing and they don't like you, try getting that signature.
Or if you're playing a lot and they don't want you to leave, try getting that signature.
So you're kind of stuck with the decision you made at a very young age, a very young age. And every writer who's 30, 40, 50, 60 years old, judging a 17-year-old decision to transfer for a better opportunity for a life that they may never get to go to the pros with, hats off. I'm all for the player.
Yeah, I am too. And, I was always a fan of the transfer portal. And we'll talk about this in a later episode because I did actually enter the transfer portal. I was also one of the first people to enter the transfer portal. However, back in these days, transfer portal didn't exist. It was very hard. Everything was word of mouth. You had to practically email people. Email and text message over Twitter or whatever the case was. Find a way to communicate with these people. And so that's what I did. And by August, I was at Duke University.
So when you selected and were going after Duke, and Duke wanted you as well, how early did you know that you guys both wanted each other? How relieved were you that they were interested? Like, there's got to be a lot of emotions because you're out there now.
Dude.
You have to find another place to play.
Yeah, when you get that release paper, you're like, oh, man, now I got to find a place to go, right? I could want to go somewhere, but if they don't want the same thing, then I'm going to have to figure something out. Now, when I first got on a phone call and a FaceTime video with who ended up being my defensive back coach, he told me out the gate he was extremely interested. He really liked me. He was excited that I was interested in going there. And their defense coordinator actually flew out to go see me. And that's when I really thought it was real. When they came out there and they extended the hand to come out, and I was able to transfer shortly after that.
What was the impact financially? There's no NIL deals. Ivy League doesn't give you any scholarships. Going to Duke University, what was the biggest change financially for you when you went to Duke University that just made an impact immediately for you?
Well, financially, it was on its face, it was $30,000 less for practically the same education. The bad thing was that they ran out of scholarships before I tried to transfer. So I had a choice, either go there and pay or find another school that had scholarships open, which at the time was also another thing that was just not readily available like it is today. With the people going in the transfer portal all the time, there's scholarships all over the place. So
when you're talking about the yearly tuition for Duke was that much less than the yearly tuition that you...
100%, yes. And it actually didn't even move up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So right away you have a financial impact. Right away you're playing not in the Ivy League anymore.
I'm in the ACC.
Now you have to play with the ACC. This is a whole different ball of wax. I mean, anybody who watches Duke football knows that they play some pretty tough teams out there. And Ivy League, no one's ever looked at the Ivy League and said, oh, Harvard, oh, man, I don't know how you're going to get by those folks. So you're playing at a whole different level. You're playing with a whole different kind of athletes. So what are you doing? Your transfer is success. You're happy. What do you mentally and physically have to do to prepare for a whole different system?
So there's one rule that I knew was going to work into my advantage, and it was the fact that in the Ivy League, they do not give red shirts, which means, according to the NCAA, I had a red shirt. So when I transferred to Duke, I was going to first not be allowed to play my first year at Duke University because I was transferring from a lower level school to a higher level school. That rule since has been abolished. But I was not allowed to play that first year. But since I had a red shirt because I came from an Ivy League school, it didn't matter. I used my red shirt my first year. So I didn't lose a year of on-field eligibility. I just used my red shirt that I had the whole time anyways. So
you went there and immediately you were able to use the red shirt, which just negated the loss of a year.
Correct.
By transferring. So you had already done this research. You're already going back and forth. So
Yes.
Now you're just getting ahead on your studies.
Yes.
Getting to hang out with coaches, getting to hang out, and were you able to practice as a redshirt? What are the rules?
I did everything a normal player could play, except I'm not allowed to wear a game jersey or pads in a game jersey on game day. That's it. That was the only thing.
So they know they have you. They can coach you up. You can play in practice. You can play on the practice squad. You can play on the first team, second team, whatever team you want to play on, however they want to use you. And they get to really see what kind of abilities you have. Were the coaches pleased through your redshirt year with you coming to Duke? And were they happy with their decision to come out and see you? Were they really happy with all those?
Yes. Okay. Everything worked out fantastic. That first year, I got extremely better. I was in an amazing program at the time. I was surrounded by some of my closest teammates to this day, and I got better. And for that first year, everything that I set out to do, I felt like I accomplished. I was able to redshirt. I was able to learn the system. I spent a whole year not worrying about my playing time. I just could practice, get bigger, faster, and stronger. Just like how we tell some of the younger athletes, when you get with bigger players, you need to reformulate your body and get familiar with the type of players that you're playing around. I had to do the same thing over again, but I was just much more mature. At this time, I was about 20 years old. So I knew what I needed to do. Now, I went through the whole season. I practiced every day, didn't have any injuries. Academically, I was fantastic. Got even better grades than when I was at Penn. Unfortunately, when I transferred, I had too many credits. So the school told me that I had to choose which classes I didn't want to transfer over from Penn because I wasn't allowed to take as many as I had because I tried that system that we talk about where I graduate early, but I couldn't do that when you transfer. So I had too many credits. I chose to drop a couple of them, and I had exactly a half. So I was, instead of a junior in the classroom, I was back to being a sophomore in the classroom going into my junior year, and everything worked out great. Spring ball came, and I was one of the best defensive backs in the room, and I was setting myself up to practice for a starting position that senior year.
So for those watching this, and obviously we have the transfer portal now, you have NIL deals. Number one, the biggest thing that I look at with this transfer is the difficult nature of trying to transfer back in that time. But also, this is still difficult, even with the transfer portal. It's even more complicated with new kids coming in, kids transferring back out. To your point, kids staying, they enter and then they come back. So there's a lot going on today, and Mason's story really is relatable to a lot of these guys, and being able to see that these decisions are not made single process elimination, one-dimensional. These are very layered decisions, and the beauty of these decisions is when you peel back the layers and see why the player wants to do this. It could be for numerous reasons. They have a parent who's sick at home and they want to go back closer to being at home. It could be because they're homesick. It could be for a multitude of reasons. I'm a big fan of giving the benefit of the doubt for the players, giving them the opportunity to control their own destiny, and then equipping the players with the knowledge and the ability to know that what they're doing and what it's going to impact long term and for where they want to be and where they're going. And when Mason was thinking about all that, I mean, there's a million reasons that people could have told you to stay there. Stay at UPenn.
Yeah.
This process is going to be a bear. You're going to miss out a whole year of playing. There's lots of people that could have told you so many negative things, but the way that you took this, the way you flipped this on its head and said, this are the positive things that I'm going to take out of this, go to a great university at Duke, save some money, be able to really excel, get yourself prepared so when you got back on the field, you were a superstar. You weren't just a guy.
Yeah, hindsight, if you fast forward to the very end of my athletic career, people would tell me, if you would have just stayed at Penn, you would have played 4 years and we would have never been in the COVID class, because that was the draft class that I was in. And they say what could have happened, what should have happened. But when you look at it, I manipulated the rules in my favor. The NCAA rules that allow players to transfer to redshirt, I was able to get 2 degrees in 5 years instead of getting 1 degree in 4. I always take that as a major win. I am very academic heavy, and I was able to improve my own skill set and make sure I wanted to be the best player I felt I could be.
And I think that's the key on wrapping up this whole episode is college gives you an opportunity to walk through a lot of doors. Whether you walk through those or not is up to you. Mason has a story where he's able to walk through these doors and really provide himself a great opportunity to start an agency, to better his life, to provide himself a career and an opportunity that goes well beyond playing years. And for a lot of players, you have that opportunity. And looking at that as well, that's a big deal also. I mean, the NIL money is fantastic. These opportunities that you're getting in college are really great. But really getting that degree, really getting that, catapult to your career, that catapult to your future, there's nothing that can replace that.
Most definitely. And I just think that nowadays with the transfer portal and the transfer rules, it's very important for players. They actually have to look at a lot more variables, honestly. They have to look at, how much NIL money the school is going to be willing to give them or what kind of deals they have. Because in my opinion, it is a very important variable when it comes to choosing the school and the room that you're going to be walking into. Kids nowadays have a lot more variables to worry about. My first transfer was a lot more old-fashioned. I had to, have a lot more raw communication. But it was just completely different. It was a completely different era, completely different time. And the kids now, I feel for, and I'm happy that they have these more empowering rules for athletes, because it gives them a chance to, either correct a decision that they made when they're 16, 17, or, increase their ability and their chances and probability of becoming a pro in their respective sports. So I'm all for the transfer rules, and I think that's really kind of what this episode hits on, is the evolution of transferring and what you think about and how it has changed so much. Because now more than ever, and you're right, transferring has never been bigger. They have seasons of transferring now. They have there are high school scholarships are on the line because of transferring players in college. So it affects a lot more than it did when I was transferring the first go around.
And with our goal here at Campus to Contracts is really to educate and inform, but also to provide this kind of layered experience that shows you that, your story is not you unique. Reaching out and talking to individuals that have been there, done that, and then Mason being there for these younger athletes to really help them see what their future holds and to be able to provide some really great guidance. So this episode was really great for for learning about going from an Ivy League to, an ACC contender, and really what that looks like, but also the changes from yesterday to today, which is really fantastic to see. I am your host, Brendan. Thank you so much for joining us at Campus to Contracts. That is Mason Williams, the agent, our agent, and we appreciate you for sharing your story with us as we walk through your college years. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.